Okay, how are you guys doing? Today we will talk about Aristotle, another great figure in Western philosophy. Remember that painting from the Sistine Chapel where we had Plato and Aristotle? Again, the reason is they are both considered key figures in Western philosophy and in Western civilization, to be honest. Of course, just like on that painting, you notice that Plato is pointing upwards, Aristotle pointing downwards. So is their philosophies are somewhat different in that way. Why Plato was pointing upwards with his forms and with the idea of the good, we hopefully figured out last time. The way out of the cave towards the light, toward the goodness, where all the forms are. That's the way Plato suggested we should be following. Now, how about Aristotle? Who was Aristotle? First of all, Aristotle was Plato's student. He was born 384 BC, about 15 years after Socrates was already executed, and at the age 18 he joined Plato's academy. Remember, we mentioned Plato's academy last time, and became his student. He remained at the academy for about 20 years until Plato's death. After Plato's death, there may have been hope that he will replace Plato as the head of the academy, because he was definitely one of the star students, but for whatever reason, it wasn't him. It was Plato's nephew who actually became next head of the academy. Aristotle left. Why exactly? Was it nephew? Was it nepotism? Was there some other consideration? We do not know. We can assume that Aristotle was upset about that, and he traveled, did some research in marine biology for a while, and then he became a tutor to Alexander the Great, a famous figure who you may know from history or from movies. He was tutoring him for quite a few years, and then after that he actually left Alexander and came back to Athens to organize his own school known as Lyceum. Lyceum is the name he gave his school, and we know it today too, because you may have heard this used again when people talk about academic establishments. Many of them are known as lyceums. That is exactly why. That was the name of Aristotle's school. Now, what about his philosophy? Who was Aristotle as a philosopher? Okay, so first of all, what did he think about Plato's philosophy? There's definitely some angles of Plato's philosophy which Aristotle agreed with, but he disagreed with the forms, with the idea of the forms. Again, remember, forms are those eternal realities which supposedly are somewhere not in this world, we do not know where, which are the only real thing which never changes. And because they never change, they are ultimate reality, and they are the only subject of knowledge. Now, Aristotle criticized them quite a lot. For one thing, he criticized them because he thought the idea doesn't make very much sense. If they are nowhere, if we cannot access them and cannot know them, what is the point even establishing them, even talking about them? The other more important thing, though, is just like all of us, he thought we live in this changing reality. So we need to be able to learn what we see around us and to understand this change, rather than talk about this eternal reality somewhere which we cannot even access. So he was a lot more down to earth in that sense. He postulated several good ideas which we should know. They will also be important for us when we will start talking about Thomas Aquinas and his proofs of the existence of God. Because Thomas Aquinas, who, by the way, for many centuries was the official philosopher of the Catholic Church, tried to prove the existence of God based on Aristotle's work. So several of these ideas, which are also in the book, and you hopefully have read the chapter, we do need to know. What are they? Okay, so for one thing, he kind of adopted the idea of forms, but he disagreed with the fact that they are outside of objects. He actually thought that forms are part of reality. The most ultimate reality, according to Aristotle, is substances, what he called substance. Substance is the most ultimate reality. And substance is any individual item we can talk about, such as dog, a guy named Socrates, a book, and so on. Each ultimate thing is a substance, and it has two parts. This is important to understand. Two parts he's talking about are form and matter. Form and matter are both needed in order for us to have a substance. Matter, of course, would be whatever material something is made out of. For example, if we're talking about a bronze statue, bronze would be your matter. How about the form? Well, it's not exactly the shape of the statue itself, because not just inanimate objects have forms. Human beings also have a form, which would be our soul. So in a way it is similar to Platonic forms, but the point though is they are part of reality. They are part of these changing subjects. What actually is happening is that matter is more or less eternal. It's always there. But forms is actually what creates change. Forms are changing. When form ceases to be or passes or morphs in some sort of way, that different subject has been created, then you have a different substance emerging as a result. So if you took a statue, melted it, and created something else out of it, that would be the most basic way to understand it. Also in terms of human beings, when human being dies, his soul, which is a form, leaves his body, and the matter is still there. We all know that. You can see if somebody died, their body starts to deteriorate, but it still is there. Physically, it is there. It is the form which has actually left or ceased to be in this case. Now, whether souls are eternal, he did not think, it's difficult to say exactly, difficult to be sure, but it doesn't seem like he thought souls themselves can be considered eternal, because he explains them as being in very close connection to our body. Now, something is eternal. The mind. Knows. Remember the word knows? Now, knows, of course, is the part of us which does the reasoning, and that is eternal. Again, there is a bit of a disagreement among the scholars, and it's hard to understand whether he meant each one of us has our personal knows, personal mind, or is he talking about the mind of all human beings together, and even more than that, some sort of eternal mind, and everything is kind of being part of that. In any case, nous is the eternal part which never dies, but form of our body, which is the soul, does leave the matter. It ceases to be, and therefore we die, and we do not probably preserve in the same way as we were before. So this is his idea of the substances. Note that his forms typically are spelled with, not with the capital, because the capital letter forms are for the ones Plato was using, but for Aristotle we just, well, that looks like a capital, but you can just put a small f, just to distinguish them, because they both call them forms, right, and it's kind of difficult to understand which ones are forms, which ones are what. And again, note that, remember the idea of particular and universal. You can again say that we do have these forms as universals. What would be universals example of a universal form, dogness. When you look at the dog, you recognize that dogness in that dog. It's not a separate form as for Plato, but it nonetheless is something which we can figure out. And then there's particular dog. So particular dog would be the real dog. Universal in Aristotle is not really something which exists separately from this collection of all the dogs. But nonetheless, there is a distinction between particular and universal. How do we ever know this universal? Well, we do that with the help of intuition. Intuition helps us to recognize the universal of dogs, of books, of chairs, and so on. So when you see the chair and you figure out that it is a chair, not a table, what you actually are doing is using your intuition to figure that out. Okay, one more thing about the forms you have to know is that he also was explaining change with the form and matter, and he did it in the following way. So every substance again is a form and matter. Form is associated with actuality and matter with potentiality. So again, taken as an example, a bronze statue, bronze itself would be potentially anything, including potentially a statue. But only once the statue has a form of a statue, it becomes actually a statue. So that's why form is associated with actuality and matter with potentiality of pretty much anything. Okay, now let's talk about the four causes. That's another interesting part of his philosophy. He was suggesting that there is not one cause, there are four. Let's say you want to build a house. What exactly would you need? Well, for one thing, you obviously would need bricks and other materials, right? That would be matter. So that would be your material cause. In order to build a house, one of the requirements is to have actual matter, to have actual components of the house, and that is material cause. Okay, what else do you need in order to build a house? Well, you definitely will need some sort of a plan, some sort of idea how are you going to do it, right? You cannot just take a pile of bricks and start piling them together. In fact, if you build in the house today, you would need to go to an architect so that he could actually draw up some sort of a plan for your future house, which will take into consideration everything. Which materials do you need, where it will be standing, what kind of ground, how it will look like, the outside, the inside, and so on. So that actually is a form. And so the second cause would be a formal cause. Why is it a cause? Well, because without it you would not be able to build a house. What else would you need? You would need builders, people who would actually put this house together. And that would be what we today call a cause. It is efficient cause. Okay, great. At this point, actually, students usually have trouble about figuring out what the fourth cause is. But if you think about it, that is the most important one. And this is, you need the reason to build a damn house. You need to either build it for yourself in order to live in it, or you need to build it for sale or for some other reason. Even if you have the material, the plan, the builders, but you don't have reason to build the house, you will never build it. So that actually is the most important one. And that is what he called final cause. So this is number 4. This is the 4 causes: material, formal, efficient, and final. Note the first 2 actually are associated with matter and the form, but that in itself is not enough. Another interesting thing to mention about his philosophy, something he talked about in the work called Metaphysics. And remember, we also mentioned before that this is why it's called Metaphysics, why we even use this term, because it was the book coming after the work called Physics. and so in Greek metaphysics, after the physics, it was dedicated to the first philosophy. The first philosophy, what he called it, the study of being. And in that work, he talked about God, essentially God being the cause of everything. So he had a very interesting take on that. He thought that the entire universe strives towards a particular end, and that end is God, who he also called the Unmoved Mover. Unmoved Mover. Why did he call God the Unmoved Mover? Well, he did not think God ever changes, because he has to be perfect. And for this reason, he himself is unmoved. But he is the reason the world actually moves. And for this reason, he is also necessary. The world develops from whatever point in time you can think about, maybe even forever. Nonetheless, it keeps on changing, right? It keeps on moving ahead. And so what actually makes him move is that unmoved mover. But in an interesting way. How does unmoved mover actually move the world? Unlike Christian God, he does not actually interfere. He does not actively do anything to the world, because he is not even a he or a she. It's some sort of abstract principle. But nonetheless, he does have an effect. So how does that work? He does it through love. And it's actually not his love for the world. It is our love for him. We love him, and you can imagine him as some sort of telos. The Greeks call it telos. Telos in Greek is the end. So the end of everything being that God, the unmoved mover. We love him, and everything loves him, and therefore strives towards him, strives to become perfect as he is. And for this reason, the world changes. You can think about it like that. Suppose you are in love with a girl or with a boy. They don't know that you are in love with them. But you do. And so you want to impress them, right? You go and exercise, or put on makeup if you're a girl, or put good clothes and try to act in a different way, try to be better. That's exactly the point here. So God himself, being unmoved mover, doesn't need us to love him and does not give us anything back. But nonetheless, he is perfect, he is our ultimate goal, and so we love him. We strive towards him even without him knowing it. It is also known as teleology, and that is why, because of this Greek word telos, teleology. So teleology is the idea that we're striving towards some sort of purpose. So this is what teleology is. The world changes because it is moved by love to God. And God himself doesn't change. What does he actually do? Absolutely nothing. He thinks. He thinks about thinking. That's what Aristotle says. Why? Well, because thinking is the most perfect thing to do. And remember this nous, the mind. So God is the pure nous. He is a pure mind. And as much as we have this reasoning and mind ourselves, that is again the part of that divine ability. And humans have it more than animals, even though animals have a little bit of reasoning, but not to that degree, and certainly more than any other creature. So humans are on top of this pyramid of the world, starting from inanimate objects, rocks, sand, and so on, then perhaps some primitive life, cockroaches, worms, then you have live creatures, cats, dogs, and so on, and on top of that you have human being, who is the highest. Nonetheless, obviously, even human being is only a very pale comparison to the unmoved mover, to God. So we are kind of striving towards God. Now, this is his explanation of change, and on metaphysical level, it is love towards God. On the level of objects we see around us, remember they are made of form, they are made of particular matter. So this is a combination of form and matter. Forms change, matter doesn't change. Why do forms change? Well, again, that entire striving towards the telos, towards God. And that striving is what makes the world move. Now, this is kind of his explanation of all of this. So, again, he's not a materialist. He obviously is not an atheist. Nonetheless, note that his God is definitely different from even Plato's God. Plato's God is the good. He is the perfect. And so we can kind of see him as closer to this kind of Christian idea of God, because everything good originates from him. Aristotle doesn't really put an emphasis on that, even though God is perfect, but he is perfect only in one sense, that he is pure thinking. Nonetheless, he is a little bit more of a rational principle rather than any kind of divine creature we normally imagine to be. Nonetheless, both Aristotle and Plato had enormous effect on the development of Christianity, as we will learn throughout this class. So hopefully that kind of explained to you how. Okay, I guess that is all we have for now for Aristotle. On Wednesday, during the discussion, we will talk about his ethics, about his moral ideas, which kind of closely connected to this stuff too. Hopefully you'll watch this video, and hopefully you will follow the discussion on Wednesday, and then we will move from Aristotle and learn more about post-Aristotelian Greek philosophy. Thank you very much, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was clear enough, because Aristotle is notoriously difficult subject. It's not easy to describe him in a few minutes lecture, but I tried my best. Thank you.